Please stay with me as I tell you what happened. And before we dive in, tell us where you're watching from in the comment box. I came home from college last Friday, expecting a normal day filled with unpacking, laundry, and maybe strumming a few chords on my guitar. Instead, the first thing I noticed was the empty corner where my antique guitar had always stood, its polished wood and intricate inlays gone. My heart sank before I even realized what had happened. I called out for my parents, Diane and Roger Lane, and their casual smiles didn't match the sinking feeling in my chest. "Where's my guitar?" I asked, my voice shaking. They exchanged glances, and Diane said it was sold last month, while Roger shrugged, muttering something about an antique shop and how it was just taking up space. I froze. My grandfather's gift, something he had given me when I was 12, painstakingly saved from generations of family history, sold without a word to me. The disbelief didn't end there. Later that evening, I got an email from a man named Ethan Caldwell, claiming he had purchased my guitar and wanted to verify its provenance. As I read his message, the numbers hit me like a punch. $71,000. $71,000. And my parents had no idea what it was really worth. The shock twisted into a tight, burning knot in my stomach. It wasn't just the money, it was the betrayal, the complete disregard for what mattered to me. I paced my small apartment, trying to process how they could sell something so personal, so irreplaceable, without even asking me. Every detail of their casual explanations rang hollow, and deep down, I began to suspect this wasn't just ignorance. This felt deliberate, like a carefully staged act to disguise something else. Heartbreak and rage mingled in a strange, heavy cocktail, and for the first time, I questioned everything about the people I trusted the most. I realized that this wasn't just about a lost guitar or a financial mistake. It was about trust broken, and the sharp sting of betrayal masked as carelessness. The journey to uncover why and what to do next was just beginning, and I had no idea how tangled it would become. Ever since I was a kid, my parents had a way of making everything about them. Decisions were never really mine, and even little things, like how I decorated my room or what hobbies I pursued, were subtly controlled. They dismissed my opinions so often that I learned to keep most thoughts to myself. Music was the one thing they never seemed to understand, yet it was the one thing that made me feel like I truly existed. My guitar wasn't just an instrument, it was a piece of me, a connection to my grandfather, and the only thing that felt completely mine. I remember countless evenings when I would sit in my room, practicing chords, and hear them argue downstairs about bills or family matters, completely oblivious to how I was growing up under their constant scrutiny. Any attempt to stand up for myself was met with sighs, rolling eyes, or a cold, "We know what's best for you." Over time, I realized that their version of love came with rules I couldn't break, boundaries I couldn't cross, and expectations I couldn't meet. My best friend, Maya, was the opposite of that. She listened, she understood, and she never judged. When I told her about small betrayals or moments where my parents crossed the line, she would nod, not with pity, but with solidarity. She reminded me that it wasn't weakness to feel hurt, and it wasn't wrong to want respect. With her, I could be honest about my frustration, my anger, and my fears. She was the one person who encouraged me to stand up for myself without guilt. After discovering what they had done with my guitar, I couldn't stop replaying old memories in my head. Had they always treated me like this? Was the sale just a careless mistake, or had it been part of a bigger pattern? The more I thought about it, the more I felt certain that I couldn't let this go. Something inside me shifted that day. Whatever their intentions, whatever excuses they would make, I knew I had to take control. I couldn't let their disregard for me and my passions define what I deserved. This wasn't just about a guitar anymore. It was about standing up for myself, and I was ready to do exactly that. I started digging the moment I realized someone else owned my guitar. The email from Ethan Caldwell wasn't just a casual message. It was detailed, professional, and full of questions about the instrument's history. He was a collector, someone who knew exactly what he was buying, and the way he described the guitar made my stomach drop. This wasn't just a normal sale. The value he mentioned was staggering, far beyond the amount my parents had received. Anger bubbled up inside me as I realized how much they had unknowingly given away. It wasn't just money. It was the complete loss of something irreplaceable, something they couldn't even begin to understand. The fact that they had handled it so carelessly made the betrayal feel deeper. Every word Ethan wrote reminded me of what had been taken, and I couldn't stop thinking about how differently things could have turned out if they had simply asked me first. I began asking questions quietly, checking receipts, tracing emails, and trying to figure out how the guitar had left our house. Every step revealed more gaps, and with each discovery, my suspicion grew. My parents' explanations didn't add up. They were vague, quick to change the subject, and seemed almost rehearsed, like they were trying to hide something. It was clear they weren't going to volunteer the truth, no matter how small. The more I investigated, the more I understood that I needed to stay calm and gather facts. This wasn't a moment to confront them blindly. It was a moment to understand the full picture. I started making mental notes of everything unusual. Conversations that didn't make sense, sudden trips to the antique store, emails deleted too quickly. Slowly, the pieces began to form a clearer image of what had happened, and the realization made my pulse quicken. I knew I had to approach this carefully. My parents were evasive, and any slip could let them cover their tracks. The challenge now was not just reclaiming what was mine, but uncovering the truth behind the sale. Every interaction, every document, and every clue became part of a plan forming in my mind, and I couldn't afford to let a single detail slip by unnoticed. I waited until dinner to bring it up, hoping to catch them off guard. I asked calmly where the guitar had gone, expecting some hesitation, but their reaction was worse than I imagined. Diane smiled weakly and said she had sold it at the antique store, like it was no big deal, and Roger nodded, adding that they didn't know the value and just thought it was taking up space. I stared at them, my chest tightening, unable to believe how casually they treated it. As they explained, I started noticing things that didn't make sense. Roger mentioned dates that didn't match the emails I had seen, and Diane described conversations that seemed rehearsed. Their eyes flicked away whenever I pressed for details, and their tone shifted whenever the antique store came up. The more they talked, the more the feeling that they were hiding something grew stronger. I realized this wasn't just about ignorance. It felt like layers of avoidance and half-truths. Anger mixed with disbelief as I processed what they were saying. It wasn't only about the money or the guitar. It was the way they could betray my trust so easily, treating a family heirloom like an object to dispose of without even asking me. Every word, every shrug, and every excuse felt like a slap, a reminder that their version of honesty was selective at best. My mind raced, weighing my options. Could I forgive them and move on, pretending this had been a simple mistake? Or should I find a way to make them understand the consequences of what they had done? The temptation to confront them publicly, to force them to admit the truth, tugged at me, but I knew patience would be my advantage. Rushing could ruin any leverage I had. As the conversation ended, I smiled politely, hiding the storm inside. On the surface, I acted like I was letting it go, but beneath that calm, plans were forming. I began piecing together how I could uncover every lie, track every misstep, and make sure they faced the reality of their actions. One thing was certain, I wouldn't let this go unnoticed, and I wasn't about to forgive blindly. I started going through old files and emails late at night, scanning everything for clues. Receipts, bank statements, shipping records. Every little detail mattered. As I sorted through them, I noticed entries that didn't match what my parents had told me. Small payments labeled vaguely, transfers to the antique store that were larger than expected, and notes that hinted at meetings I hadn't known about. It was clear they had tried to cover their tracks, but the trail was sloppy enough for me to follow. While examining the documents, I also discovered more about the guitar itself. It wasn't just rare. It was one of a kind, made by a master luthier with a lineage tracing back generations. Each mark, each scratch had a story, and no other instrument could ever replace it. The thought of what had been lost hit me harder, but it also fueled a determination I hadn't felt before. This wasn't just a matter of money anymore. It was about reclaiming something that belonged to me and proving that they couldn't dismiss my rights so easily. As I pieced together the timeline of the sale, the gaps in their stories became obvious. Every inconsistency added to the picture, showing not carelessness but negligence bordering on deception. I realized that knowledge was my weapon. If I could document everything, connect the dots, and present it in the right way, I could shift the balance. The advantage had moved to me, and I could use it to make them face the truth they had ignored. I began drafting ideas, thinking step by step about how to approach the situation. Every move had to be precise, calculated, and undeniable. There was no room for emotion to cloud the strategy. The files, the emails, and the receipts became pieces of a puzzle that, once completed, would give me control over the outcome. By the end of the night, I had a clear plan forming in my mind. I wasn't just reacting anymore, I was preparing. Every piece of evidence was a tool, every observation a step closer. I knew exactly what needed to be done to ensure that what was rightfully mine wouldn't stay in someone else's hands, and this time, I would make sure nothing could stop me. I started acting like the guitar didn't bother me anymore, smiling politely whenever it came up and pretending to move on. At the same time, I dropped little hints, casual remarks about the missing instrument, questions that made them stumble, and comments about how rare things could be worth far more than anyone imagined. Their reactions were priceless. Roger would shift uncomfortably, and Diane's voice would tighten whenever she tried to explain herself. Family dinners became subtle battlegrounds. I would ask innocent questions about old purchases or antique stores, and they would answer defensively, sometimes contradicting each other without realizing it. Their small lies and excuses began to pile up, and I watched as frustration and embarrassment crept into their tone. Every backhanded comment from them, every sigh of annoyance, was a clue I could use later. It was strange, but satisfying, to see how fragile their composure was when faced with truths they couldn't fully control. Uncle Wayne came over one evening. He didn't know about the guitar, but he gave advice on handling difficult people and staying calm under pressure. I listened carefully, nodding along, absorbing every suggestion. His words fit perfectly into what I was already planning, even though he had no idea I was using them to shape the way I interacted with my parents. I deliberately created situations where they would reveal more than they intended. One evening, I mentioned an antique appraisal casually, and Diane immediately over-explained, giving details that didn't match what I had uncovered. Roger, trying to defend her, slipped up with dates and names. It was almost too easy. Their pride and need to appear innocent worked in my favor, exposing gaps and contradictions that I could later use. Each small interaction strengthened my confidence. I realized that I wasn't powerless. I had the ability to guide conversations, to watch them falter, and to collect pieces of truth without them realizing it. I wasn't just gathering evidence anymore. I was learning how to turn their own behavior into a tool, and it was intoxicating to feel that first real taste of control. I reached out to Ethan Caldwell with careful words, making it clear that I wasn't trying to cause trouble, but simply wanted to clarify the history of the guitar. I explained that my parents had no idea what they were selling and seemed unaware of its true worth. His responses were measured but curious, and I could tell he appreciated honesty and someone who understood the instrument as much as he did. Over several conversations, I shared photos, letters, and small details about the guitar's lineage that my parents had ignored or dismissed. Ethan's tone shifted from polite interest to genuine concern, and he began to see that this wasn't just a typical sale. Slowly, trust formed between us. He admitted that he would have paid much more if he had known the full history, and that my parents' actions had unintentionally deprived me of both recognition and fair value. With Ethan's help, I started piecing together the financial side of the sale. He provided insights into how rare instruments were tracked, sold, and appraised. Together, we could see just how much my parents had mismanaged the situation, and it became clear that the loss wasn't a small mistake. It was significant and avoidable. The more we uncovered, the stronger my determination grew. I knew that this evidence, combined with Ethan's knowledge, could show not only the financial impact, but also the deeper betrayal of trust. As I gathered more details, my parents began to sense something had shifted. Their casual dismissiveness started to waver when they noticed me paying closer attention to emails, notes, and transactions. Subtle changes in their behavior indicated that they suspected I was no longer just accepting their explanations. The tension at home thickened, and every glance or vague remark became a reminder that they were watching me as closely as I was watching them. With Ethan as an ally, I finally felt prepared. The puzzle pieces were coming together, and the path forward was becoming clear. I had proof, support, and a strategy forming in my mind. Everything pointed toward reclaiming what was mine, and for the first time, I felt fully ready to make my move and confront the consequences of their actions. I planned carefully, knowing that one wrong move could ruin everything. I invited my parents to a small family gathering, casually mentioning that a few friends were curious about the antique items in our home. I framed it as a casual conversation about collectibles, knowing it would appeal to their pride. When we arrived, I subtly steered the discussion toward the guitar, mentioning an appraisal that Ethan had conducted. Their reactions were immediate. Diane laughed nervously, claiming she didn't remember much about the sale, while Roger added that the store had handled everything. I asked specific questions, phrasing them as curiosity rather than accusation, and watched as their carefully constructed story began to crumble. Under the eyes of friends and relatives, inconsistencies started slipping out, dates, amounts, and names all tangled in ways they couldn't fully control. Every answer they gave was recorded and noted. I kept my voice calm, letting them talk while I observed their body language and tone. The pride they had relied on to defend themselves started to crack, and the more they tried to appear confident, the more obvious the gaps became. It was clear they had underestimated me, assuming I would let it go or be intimidated by their casual attitude. I let small comments slide, pretending to misunderstand or forgive, while strategically highlighting moments where their explanations didn't add up. Each slip, each contradiction, added another layer of proof that I could use. It wasn't about humiliating them publicly, it was about creating a record, a clear trail of their own words that would show exactly how they had handled the situation. As the evening ended, I felt a quiet satisfaction. For the first time, I could see the situation shifting in my favor. I had controlled the environment, guided the conversation, and collected evidence without anyone realizing it. The balance of power had moved. I wasn't just reacting anymore, I was leading, and every step brought me closer to reclaiming what had been taken. For the first time in weeks, I felt like I had control over my own life and the things that mattered most to me. I called my parents into the living room, making sure everything was in order. The atmosphere was tense, and I could see them exchanging uneasy glances. I took a deep breath and started explaining, step by step, exactly how the sale had unfolded, what documents I had uncovered, and the true value of the guitar. Every number, every transaction, and every detail was laid out clearly, leaving no room for excuses. As I spoke, their expressions shifted from confusion to disbelief, and finally to shame. They opened their mouths a few times, trying to defend themselves, but the facts were too solid. I didn't raise my voice or show anger. I presented everything calmly, letting the weight of the truth hit harder than any argument could. I could see Roger's shoulders slump and Diane avoid my gaze. The pride they had leaned on for years was gone, replaced by a quiet, stunned realization. I paused after explaining the financial loss and the emotional impact, letting it sink in. I told them that this wasn't just about money or a material object. It was about trust, respect, and recognition of what belonged to me. Their reactions were subtle but telling. They knew that nothing could erase the consequences of their choices, and no amount of apologies could undo what had been done. Then I made my intentions clear. I wasn't interested in revenge for the sake of punishment, but the situation required boundaries and fairness. I explained that future decisions about anything of value, especially family heirlooms, would need to involve me. Legally reclaiming part of the funds was on the table if necessary, and I was prepared to follow through. As I finished, the room fell silent. The tension was heavy, but for me, it was liberating. I felt a weight lift from my shoulders. The betrayal, the confusion, and the uncertainty had been addressed, and I had regained control. Seeing them confronted with the truth without being able to dismiss it gave me a sense of justice and closure that I hadn't expected. For the first time since discovering the sale, I felt empowered and confident that my rights, my passions, and my voice mattered. After weeks of planning and careful action, I finally secured what was mine. The funds recovered didn't erase the past, but they gave me a tangible sense of justice, and more importantly, I regained the emotional connection to the guitar that had been taken from me. It felt like reclaiming a part of myself, a piece of my grandfather's legacy that no one could take away again. My parents were quieter now, their usual confidence replaced by awkwardness and forced civility. They couldn't ignore what had happened or pretend it didn't matter. Seeing them confront their own mistakes, realizing the impact of their choices, brought a strange mixture of relief and validation. I wasn't just holding them accountable financially, they were forced to face the selfishness that had shaped so many of their decisions. With the situation settled, I could finally focus on my music without distraction or resentment. Every practice session became more meaningful, not just because of the notes or melodies, but because I felt fully in control of my passion. The guitar, once a source of frustration and heartbreak, now symbolized resilience and independence. Each chord I played reminded me that I could protect what mattered to me and use my intelligence and determination to create change. One evening, I sat in my room, the guitar resting on my lap, and let my fingers move over the strings. The sound was familiar but felt richer, heavier with the lessons I had learned. It wasn't just about playing music anymore, it was about reclaiming agency over my life. The act of playing became a quiet victory, a personal celebration of what I had achieved through strategy, patience, and courage. Looking back, I realized that even the deepest betrayal could be transformed into strength. The experience taught me that clever thinking and persistence could turn a loss into an opportunity. The guitar's melody carried more than notes. It carried vindication, pride, and a reminder that I was capable of standing up for myself. I had lost nothing in the end that truly mattered. Instead, I had gained confidence, control, and the certainty that my voice, my choices, and my passions were mine to protect forever.